Why did my father hide his brother's forgiveness inside a spanner case, buried under decades of silence and rusty wrenches? I never knew he had a brother, never knew he carried a guilt that shaped his entire life, until a stray cat brought Elara to his door, and a forgotten tape revealed the truth. And now, sitting in his shed with the Ginger Tom on his lap, I'm left with a question I can't answer. How does a man who spent 56 years believing he was unforgiven learn to let himself be chosen again? I never asked if he recognized his own voice on that tape. He gave away his inherited tools but refused my offer to move back. I saw the cat prove it's never too late to be chosen again. He was 73 when he lost the caretaker job at the community center. Didn't tell anyone. Not me. Not my sister. He just stopped going one day and let us believe he was still working. I thought it was pride. I thought it was stubbornness. I thought a lot of things about my father, and most of them weren't kind. You're probably thinking, another story about a distant parent and a resentful child. Fair enough. I felt that way too. For 6 years we barely spoke. 6 years of phone calls that lasted 3 minutes. 6 years of Christmas dinners where he sat in his armchair and I sat on the sofa and we watched the same football match without saying a word. I told myself he didn't care. Easier that way. Then Mum died, and I had to come back to Leeds to sort through the house. His house now. The one he'd lived in since before I was born. Same floral wallpaper in the hallway. Same crack in the bathroom ceiling. Same smell of tea and old wood. I wasn't ready for any of it. The first thing I noticed was the cat. A Ginger Tom with one torn ear, sitting on the garden wall like he owned the place. I asked Dad whose cat it was. He shrugged. Said it just showed up one day. Said he'd been leaving out sources of milk. Which was ridiculous, you know. He was lactose intolerant himself, but he'd buy whole milk for a stray cat. That cat became the bridge. I didn't see it then. But that's what it was. Because the cat belonged to someone else. A woman named Elara, 2 doors down. She'd been looking for it for weeks, and one afternoon she knocked on Dad's door. He told me later he almost didn't answer. He was embarrassed about the state of the garden. He'd let it go after Mum died, and the grass was up to his knees. But he opened the door anyway, and Elara said, "I think you've got my cat." And my father, who hadn't laughed in months, apparently said, "I think you're right." I only heard this secondhand, you understand. From Elara, months later, over a cup of tea in her kitchen. She told me he invited her in. They talked for 2 hours. About the cat. About the garden. About nothing. And then he showed her the shed. That's where the tools lived. His father's tools. His grandfather's. Wrenches and pliers and hammers that had been in the family for generations. He kept them all in that same metal spanner case, the one with the dent in the corner where his brother had dropped it as a kid. I never knew he had a brother. Nobody talked about it. I thought my father was an only child. That was the story we were told. But Elara said he opened that case, pulled out a spanner with a date scratched into the handle, 1967, and said, "This was my brother's. He died when I was 17. I wasn't there, so I can't swear to any of it. But Elara is a careful woman. She remembers things exactly. She said he didn't cry. He just held the spanner and stared at the date, like he was waiting for something. She asked him what happened. He said, "I don't want to talk about it." And that was that. Except it wasn't. Because a week later, Elara came back with a cassette tape. She'd found it in her late husband's belongings. He'd been a hoarder, God rest him, and she'd been clearing out boxes for months. The tape was in a plain white sleeve with my father's name written on it in faded blue ink. Alaric. No surname. Just Alaric. She almost threw it away. She told me she'd held it over the bin for a full minute before something stopped her. Maybe the handwriting. Maybe the way the tape felt heavier than it should. She brought it to my father instead. He didn't play it in front of her. He waited until she left. Then he sat in his armchair, in the living room with the floral wallpaper, and pressed play. I wasn't there for that either. But I found the tape later, on the kitchen table, with a note next to it in his shaky handwriting. Listen. So I did. The voice on the tape was young. Younger than I'd ever heard my father sound. He was 17, maybe 18, talking to his brother. Recording a message for him because the brother was in hospital. The brother's name was Silas. He'd been in a car accident. And my father's voice on that tape was raw. Not crying, but close to it. He said, "Silas, I'm sorry. I know you think I pushed you. I didn't mean to. It was a stupid argument. I'm sorry. Please wake up." And then Silas's voice came on. Weak. Crackling. But clear enough. "Alaric. You didn't push me. I fell. I was being stupid. It's not your fault. I forgive you. I've always forgiven you. Don't carry this. Okay. Don't carry it." The tape ended. There was silence for a few seconds, then a click. I sat in the kitchen and stared at my hands. My father had carried that guilt for 56 years. 56 years of silence. 56 years of thinking he'd caused his brother's death. And Silas had forgiven him on tape, but Alaric never knew because the tape had been lost, given to a friend, stored in a box, forgotten until Elara found it. I called my father. He didn't pick up. So I walked next door, to the garden with the overgrown grass, and I found him in the shed. He was sitting on a stool, holding that spanner with the date scratched in. The cat was on his lap. I sat down on the concrete floor. I didn't say anything at first. Then I said, "I heard the tape." He nodded. Didn't look at me. "I didn't know," I said. "I didn't know any of it." He shrugged. "Why would you, Myra? I never told anyone." And then he told me the rest. How Silas had been in hospital for 3 weeks before he died. How my father visited every day, but Silas was in a coma most of the time. How the one time Silas woke up, he'd recorded that message, but a nurse had taken the tape and said she'd put it in his belongings. It got mixed up with another patient's things. Ended up with Elara's husband, who'd been in the same ward for a broken leg. "It's not your fault," I said. He looked at me then. Really looked. "I know that now. But I've known it all along, haven't I? I just needed to hear it." That was the turning point. That was the moment resentment turned into something else. I'd spent 6 years being angry at a man who'd spent 56 years being angry at himself. We were both carrying the wrong weight. Here's where I have to admit something. I did this wrong. Multiple times. For 6 years, I told myself my father didn't care about me because he didn't call, didn't visit, didn't ask about my life. But he couldn't. He was trapped inside his own guilt. Every time he looked at me, he must have thought about Silas. About the brother he'd lost. About the son he could have been. I don't know. I'm guessing now, which Elara told me is a dangerous habit. She said, "You can't know what someone carries unless they show you. And not everyone knows how to show you." She was right. So I did something that surprised even me. I asked him if I could take the tape. He hesitated, then handed it over. I took it to a local recording studio, a small one on the outskirts of Leeds, and I had them digitize it. Made a copy. Gave the original back to him in a new box, a wooden one I'd bought at a charity shop. He opened it, saw the tape, and didn't say anything. But he put it in the spanner case, next to that 1967 wrench. And then he did something even stranger. He took all the tools, the wrenches, the pliers, the hammers, and he gave them to a young man who lived 3 streets away, a teenager who was trying to fix up an old motorbike. My father had seen him working on it from his garden. He walked over one day, introduced himself, and handed him the entire collection. "You'll need these more than I will," he said. The kid didn't know what to say. Neither did I. But my father came back to the shed, sat down on the stool, and smiled. "Feels lighter," he said. That's when I understood. The prize was voluntarily given away. Letting go was the victory. He didn't need the tools anymore. He didn't need the guilt. He didn't need the resentment. He needed to pass it on. But here's the thing about boundaries. They don't always dissolve just because you've had a breakthrough. I offered to move back to Leeds. I said I could transfer my job, find a flat nearby, be closer. He shook his head. "You have your life, Myra. And I have mine. Your family." The answer is still no. I wanted to argue. But I saw his point. He wasn't rejecting me. He was protecting something. His independence, maybe. Or maybe he just needed the space to figure out who he was without the guilt. So I left. I went back to my life. But we talk now. Every week. Longer than 3 minutes. He told me Elara invited him to her garden for tea last Sunday. He said the cat sat between them the whole time. I still don't know if he ever really forgave himself. Silas's voice on that tape said the words, but believing them takes longer. Maybe a lifetime. But I've stopped resenting him. That's something. And every time I drive past a hardware store, I think about those tools. About the spanner with the date. About the shed where my father finally let go. 2 cups of tea. 2 empty chairs. Still half closed. You a family, and the answer is still no. That's the whole miracle. When your father said you a family, and the answer is still no, would you have argued or accepted? If this story reminded you that forgiveness can wait decades, tap like. For anyone who found a cassette tape that changed how they saw a parent, subscribe.